So at the beginning of the new year, I like to reflect on some of the core teachings from the Buddha. Um, Probably my favorite is the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Um, this comes from a sutta called get the name right, Dhamma Chaka Patana Sutta, setting the wheel of the Dharma in motion. And there's kind of a nice backstory to this. The Buddha had been practicing with five companions, like very austere method of practicing and eating just a small morsel of food and every day. And um, it doesn't actually go into a lot of detail, but you can imagine, because some of this practice still happens, like taking difficult positions for the body and maintaining them for a long period of time, or sleeping on a bed of nails, these kinds of like austerities that the belief was that you could kind of like uh, conquer the body in some way, and that this would lead to some sort of like spiritual realization. And then the Buddha, he finally, he was about to die. He was, he said he would touch his belly and feel his backbone, and all his hair was falling out, and he would stand up and fall over immediately, and just kind of realize, there must be a better way. And kind of came up with this idea of the middle way, that he could partake of some nourishment but not to excess success. And then he with this sort of new insight that it wasn't necessary to like crush the body in some way, he sat down uh, in front of the Bodhi tree and committed to awakening. And when he awoke, there was some sort of like internal debate about what he should do. Like, he kind of thought that the Dharma that he had discovered was too subtle, and it was like so much away from kind of the stream of culture and the way people live, that he was just sort of contemplating just being there in the bliss of his awakening. And it said that a kind of a deity, Brahma Sampatipi, came down and said, you have to share this with people, and prevailed upon him to share with people. And so he thought, who can I teach? And he remembered his five friends who had abandoned him when they thought he went soft when he started eating regular amounts of like food, like gruel, instead of just morsels of food. And so he embarked on this journey to find his five friends. And my favorite part of the journey is that he's walking, it's like a long distance, probably many days or weeks of walking. And um, while he's walking, he meets this person who, uh, this is a common theme in the writings from the time of the Buddha, that this person noticed the Buddha's serene complexion and demeanor, and got very curious and said, tell me about your teacher and what your teacher teaches. And here's the Buddha's response: I am the all transcending, the all knowing, the stainless, fully liberated by destruction of craving. By myself I have known. And whom should I point to as my teacher? I have no teacher. There is no one like me. I alone am the fully enlightened one whose fires are quenched and extinguished. And I don't know exactly what the person says, but it's sort of like, okay. He's just sort of like, you know, good for you, and just sort of walks thinking, this guy's insane. What's he talking about? And maybe what I love about that is that, we think of the Buddha as being such a profound teacher, and, you know, certainly was the case if you believe the account, people waking up left and right, he would go and people would just like grasp the essence of the teachings from, a single word or single gesture, but there was a learning curve. he he actually refined his skill as he went along. Um, so he goes to his five friends, and they're practicing, and they kind of are giving him the cold shoulder. They're not like greeting him, or normally when someone respected would come into the circle, you would greet them, you'd prepare them a seat, you'd wash their feet, sort of like welcome them into the circle, and they were kind of like reluctant to do that. But he started talking, and he said, like, I've discovered something here, and um, you know me. Have you ever heard me talk like this? And they said, we haven't really heard you talk like this. So they consented to the teaching, and this teaching gets sort of, you know, mistranslated or misunderstood. Uh, as in fact, the very first time I heard it, it's like outside of like a proper Dharma context, it was expressed as life is suffering, and that seems kind of like a downer. But when you look more closely at what the Buddha was teaching, he was teaching. Uh, uh, he was pointing out there's two, so Four Noble Truths, there's two, maybe three, depending on how you count, aspects to the truths. One is the insight, the realization. So the Buddha had this realization that uh, suffering, stress, difficulty is a kind of through line of this human existence. He describes it as birth is stressful, aging is stressful, death is stressful, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair are stressful. Association with the unbeloved is stressful. Separated from the loved is stressful. Not getting what is wanted is stressful. And I remember distinctly the first time I heard this teaching, it was like I felt a relief. It was sort of like somebody was just like giving the straight facts, not sugarcoating it. Like life is difficult, like have it has its share of difficulty. And at the time I was going through a particularly stressful time. My background is as a lawyer. I was a young lawyer. I had a lot of luck and some hard work, and got a position at a very prestigious law firm. Supposed to be kind of like a pinnacle of success, and I was absolutely miserable and felt like, how can I be miserable? It must be something wrong with me. And then I heard these words, and I was like, wow, okay, this is relieving. Like I had a kind of a mind frame that anytime there was some distress or suffering, that I had done something wrong, I had misapplied a strategy, that it was some personal failing or character defect. So the words spoke to me not because they were novel, but because they really accurately kind of described what I was experiencing, and uh, that the words rang true made me want to listen more deeply. And at the time, I was quite unhappy and really looking for some solace or relief. I stumbled upon dating myself here, a series of cassette tapes from the Newport Beach Public Library. That was Jack Cornfield teaching the basic Buddhism, beginning of Buddhism. Uh, And I was so captivated by those tapes. I listened to them again and again and again. I don't think I ever returned them to the library. They just eventually they started disintegrating, and I was splicing them back together as best I could. And this is an aside. It was very low production quality kind of thing. Like you just got that impression that someone just took a tape recorder in front of him And it turned out that was the case. Like they used to do Monday night meditations, and if you've ever been to Spirit Rock in the early days, there was just like a trailer, and that was their sort of Dharma hall, and so there's all kinds of background noise. And one background noise that was really prominent was the sound of a really creaky door opening and closing. That was sort of like seared into my brain. And then about 14 years later, I went to Spirit Rock on a whim, not making the connection that this center was founded by Jack, who tapes I had loved. But I walked into the double wide trailer and I heard the sound of the door creaking. And it was like, wow, some strange circumstances brought me here. But the second part of the teaching, so there's this insight, this realization, this recognition or acknowledgement that life has its ups and downs. And then the second part, which is even more transformational, which is that suffering, that stress, that discontent is to be known. That's the practice instruction that comes with the insight. And this was such a paradigm shift for me because like I was in a lot of distress every day at work, but I was like the game I was playing was just trying to get out of it, to pretend everything was okay. I would give myself a lot of like these sort of somewhat hollow, but these self pep talks about how it was going to be okay or I was going to get through it. Uh, really unwilling to like meet the actual experience that was happening. A lot of distraction and like, like unhelpful coping mechanisms and avoidance. And then I heard this teaching, like just pay attention to what's actually happening here. And I had this almost instant realization that the a flavor of the distress I was experiencing in the workplace was fear. There's like a pervading, anxious fear. Sometimes it was even like terror. And and when I looked closely, and I contemplated, like, what are the things that one would legitimately be afraid of, like being humiliated or being yelled at or being, like fired, I suppose, or having your pay docked or punished in some way. Um, that none of these things really happened in the firm I worked for. Like, there was a, I wouldn't say that people were nice, but they weren't yellers. They weren't, there wasn't a lot of screaming and yelling. It was more sort of like passive aggressive. And so just realizing that, so I just sort of like began to attune to that fear. That was my primary practice in the office. And it was like it was in the walls, it was in the fabric of the place, just this like kind of like anxious fear. And I remember clearly one day I was just aware of fear, I was kind of labeling it. It's like fear. And then this voice, I guess it was my voice popped in and said, not mine. And and from that point on, I wasn't so much at odd with that experience of fear. It was just like a recognition that it was in the field, it was in the culture of the place, it was in the, like I said, in the walls, all my colleagues, but it wasn't really real in some way. It's like um, the second noble truth says that this experience of dukkha, what they're called, suffering, stress, unsatisfactoriness, the whole range of like extreme despair and suffering to like just not quite right. Even as I sit here, it's like about 3 degrees too cool in this room. And this is sort of like the prevailing experience that like, this is something that could be adjusted for to be made optimal. That this experience comes from clinging, craving, the the word that we get really translates as thirst. This kind of like, and often it is that, desire for something that's unpleasant, something that's pleasant, and pushing away or getting rid of something that's unpleasant. Uh, and what I noticed was a lot of attachment to views, like shouldn't be. This is actually something that I continue to work with when I look around the world and feel distress. It's some version of it shouldn't be like this. How can it be like this? It's so unfair that it's like this. Um, there's a kind of contentiousness with how things are, in a way that's not helpful. Like certainly there's a forum or a place for us to fight against injustice, to stand up for what we believe in, um, and the Buddha famously did these kinds of things. He would try to stop wars. He would one story, he marched onto a battlefield knowing that the two sides would stop fighting because they both cared about his well-being. But in this moment, where I'm railing against something that's outside my control, the way in which that suffering is optional. And most of the training, most of the practice is to learn to let go of that attachment to uh, how we want things to be rather than how they really are. So again, the insight that clinging is the source of suffering, and then the practice instruction that clinging is to be known. You can bring more discernment to the experience of suffering to see, like, what am I clinging to in this moment? What am I attached to? What can I not let go of this moment? Series of questions you can actually, you know, real time, like moment of reactivity, a moment of stress, to ask yourself, what do I think should be happening in this moment? Or what do I think I need? Or what do I think should not be happening? Or what am I afraid of? These kinds of questions to illuminate the how our suffering is being constructed in the mind as a way of like learning to untangle and unwind that suffering. The third noble truth that relief is possible. One can let go of clinging. Uh, and then the fourth noble truth is that there's a whole path um, for letting go, the Eightfold Path, which is another one of my favorite teachings, but maybe beyond the scope of this evening. And I think there's a refinement that we have to apply in our I was going to say in our modern day, but I don't know if this is universal, but some kind of balance or discernment, and when we turn towards what's difficult, to, especially when there's a lot of difficulty in the field, like to assess uh, what's our capacity in this moment to meet this experience with a kind of receptivity and friendliness, with metta, with compassion, with caring. And when do we need more resourcing? And developing a kind of wisdom to know where is most useful to rest the mind. A lot of the meditation that I do, I feel like what's most nourishing is actually really just withdrawing the mind from certainly the external world and maybe even some of the internal drama, to like create space for body mind kind of finds its own level. Like we know this with movement. If I run across a field, I'll be all out of breath, and uh, so many things happening in the body with blood pressure and heart rate and respiration. And uh, to regulate ourselves, we just have to come into stillness. And actually, it's actually the nature of the body to regulate. It's the dharma of the body that it regulates. Uh, Even we say like I regulated myself, it's really just a manner of speaking. It's actually happening on its own. And our meditation practice is the same way, that if we create this, the equivalent, a kind of more or less being still, more or less not engaging in a lot of thinking and activity of the mind, that it creates the space in which we naturally, body comes into the zone of regulation, moving from fight, flight, freeze to rest and digest, and the mind gets more calm and settled. And the idea or the teachings are that, we use those moments of calm and settledness to be able to look more clearly at our experience, to disentangle the knots that keep us tied. And the sometimes you hear this word vipassana is like the way we would like digest an experience, to see that there's a story, there's thoughts, images, maybe a paradigm or a belief, and concurrent with that story is usually some emotional flavor, constellations of sensations that we recognize as familiar emotions. And then what tends to be most fruitful in the meditative sphere is just like resting with uh, most basic, most elemental sensations in the body, almost always more manageable than the fantastic stories we concoct and the powerful energies of emotions. There's this seminal teaching is sometimes referred to as the lion's roar. The teaching was so profound that it reverberated through the universe like the roar of a lion. And so this teaching ends with, uh, he gives the teaching, and then he says, so in that moment, in that instance, a cry shot up right to the Brahma worlds, and this 10,000-fold cosmos shivered and quivered and quaked, while a great measureless radiance appeared in the cosmos, surpassing the effulgence of the Devas. It's like a poetic way of saying this was a really big deal, and the universe reacted. Well, thank you, everyone. It's nice to be with you. And everybody be well, take care, stay safe. We'll see you soon.